All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone live and who's watching the recording, and welcome to our regional webinar that the NYC ATD chapter is hosting. My name is Callan Swaim, and I will be the moderator for today. And we're really excited to talk about innovation in HR, talent development, essentially the future of work, and kind of where we're all at right now. We have some amazing panelists today. One very a special one that we want to first shout out, which is Cypher Learning, which is ATD's silver sponsor. So thank you so much for being here. And we have some amazing professionals, academics, practitioners that we're about to have some good conversation. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll ask all of the panelists to introduce themselves. So Nabil, I will start with you. Could you give us a intro?
Sure, great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for making it. Nabil Ahmed here. And just quick background about me. I work at the intersection of really the business to technology and the learning space. I teach some graduate classes at Columbia around org learning strategy and digital HR, digital workplace. As you can see, probably from my background here, I have a sort of learning newsletter of things that I've done over the past 15 or so years, just trying to spread the wealth and knowledge of that, and really looking forward to our conversation today. And thanks for having me.
Thanks, Nabil. Graham.
Hi, I'm Graham Glass. I'm the CEO and founder of Cypher Learning. Our company has a modern cloud-hosted learning platform which is used by schools and businesses around the world. So, for example, the entire Qatari K-12 system is actually on the Cypher platform. And the thing that I'm most interested in, and I'm going to be talking about today, is leveraging artificial intelligence in the world of L&D and training. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some thoughts about that.
Great. Thanks, Graham. Yelena.
Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here. I'm Yelena Mamadova, joining from New York and representing McKinsey here. And my official role, is driving our skills transformation strategy for the entire firm. And something that I'm particularly passionate about is the intersection of computer sciences, so we'll call it artificial intelligence. I believe that's much more buzzword, and the talent practices, and really helping the world to get to a place where we see a really awesome opportunity of partnership in those domains. Excited to be here.
Thanks, Yelena. And Jason, our road warrior.
Yeah, so give me 1 second as I'm turning off. So my name is Jason Gulia. I'm actually an English professor at Berkeley College. So a lot of what I do, especially right now in terms of artificial intelligence, I do a lot of consulting. So I work with a lot of universities, colleges, high schools, kind of across the board in terms of how to work ChatGPT into lesson plans. And so that's a lot of what I'm doing right now. And other than that, I teach English literature and writing and anything related to the humanities. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. And for all of you who are just joining, thank you so much. We just completed introductions, but what we really want you to take away from this next hour and 10 minutes is around having a better understanding around what innovation looks like in talent and development, and also taking away bits and pieces of things you can actually apply after this call, right? So even companies, regardless of the size, regardless of what your role is, we want you to be able, and also regardless of what your budget is, let's be honest, in the climate that we're in, we want you to be able to kind of open up your mind to ways that we can see innovation in talent and development. So starting out, really want to talk about very basically what technology means in talent and development, right? So we hear a lot about that in engineering and product and tech places and spaces. So what are innovative ways that you are seeing technology being used in talent, learning, OD, and other HR spaces? So I'm going to bring that to Nabil first.
Sure. Thanks. Excited to start off here. I'll tell you a quick story. Last night, I was teaching a class around digital HR and digital workplace, as I mentioned just a bit ago, and we had a guest speaker come in who was the head of, I believe, people experience for Google, and I'm sure we all know that company. So lots of interesting things to say. And this continual theme kept coming up around what are we doing in the digital space, but how does it relate to what's called the employee experience? And one thing that the speaker said that really stood out to me, and I'd like to share it with you now, is this an experience that matters? So for instance, when we're looking at, the question was really around, okay, we see lots of development happening, engineering, product space. What can we do, or how can we take advantage of that more for the HR, OD, talent, L&D space? And that was really his answer in a very simple way, is that, okay, if you're looking at something where we start to see, all right, well, maybe this is a bit of a painful type of experience. Well, how much does that matter to your organization and to you and to the people within that organization? And if it does, then there's perhaps something that you should put a spotlight on and start to do something about it. If it's less so, then really the idea is to make it as streamlined and an easy and as less miserable as possible. So to me, I think that's a good, I viewed it as a really good framework just to start out, to ask yourself, here's the litmus test of what to do. Now, of course, when we're thinking about innovations in technology, I think most, if not all of us in our intros talked about, of course, the AI space, right? Artificial intelligence. And my quick definition of that is really the simulation of human intelligence through machines or whatnot. And there's a lot of ups and downs, I think, in that space. I'm a former software developer. I think Graham and maybe a couple of others are as well. So I think we know the technology space, but when we map it to what the possibilities are for human connection, that's really the possibility there. And of course, the latest one, and then I'll stop here, is over the last 6, 9, 12 months, we've seen an explosion around, let's call it the generative space. For those of you, of course, we know the ChatGPT. You may not know this, the G actually stands for generative in GPT. Generative, I think, pre-trained transformer. So we're using a lot of this generative type of technology. And then the one example that I'll say, and then I'll pass it back over to Callan, is really looking at, in the L&D space, one area that I'm interested in is seeing how can we replace some potential, let's call them roadblocks that have happened before. About 5 years ago, I was working within an organization where we needed to do a voiceover intro for our head of market development, business development. And all of our L&D course intros, the site, everything was ready, but we just needed to get on this business leader schedule. And we couldn't because he was traveling, of course, getting business and revenue for the company. So now there's technology where you can essentially record their voice for 5-10 seconds and then generate their voice and use that in, of course, an ethical type of way. And so to me, that's one very small but pointed use case where I see lots of really interesting technologies that can be applied in this talent L&D space to help go to market, so to speak, quicker. So I'll stop with that, and thank you. Back to you, Cal.
Yeah, no, Nabil, I think when you talked about miserable experiences during work, that really hit home. I think we all have those, even though we definitely don't want to. So love that approach. And now, Graham, over to our other resident engineer.
So I will say, for the record, I'm also an educator. So prior to founding Cypher Learning, I used to teach computer science at the University of Texas, Dallas. And then I founded and ran a professional training company all over the United States. So I've personally built 20 or 30 really good courses, and I've taught thousands of people. And I've also educated a lot of other trainers. So I do come from like an education background. So first of all, I love that phrase that Nabil said about, we want to make the experience slightly less miserable. And that is something that's really important. It's even more important in some respects than AI, although AI can help you towards that goal. And it's interesting, I think that there's a lot of technology out there that is pretty miserable. It's not commercial quality, it's not slick and elegant, it's like very old school. And I know when we've been demonstrating our Cypher platform to analysts, one of the guys from Brandon Hall goes, "This is the first time I've seen a platform that modern learners expect." So I will say there is just a general idea of the interface should be very simple to use. That being said, though, AI is going to make a massive difference. And why am I so sure? Because I've been personally working on this stuff and I've seen what it can do now. So let me just tell you a little story that will it'll blow your mind. And I was part of the team building it, and it blew my mind. So I mentioned, I used to teach computer science at UT Dallas, and I had to build a course on Unix and C, which is a technical issue, but it was a grind. And there was a huge amount of work involved. It was like hundreds and hundreds of hours. So when we were looking at how can we use AI in our learning platform, we decided the first thing we're going to do is to focus on the course creators. There's a lot of other things that we're going to do for the learner side, but we said, let's focus on content creators because generative AI can really help with this. And we started very simple. Let's just build a course outline. And that was like, wow, that was actually pretty good. Well, let's sprinkle competencies so you can track people's strengths and weaknesses. That was pretty amazing what it did. So we decided we're going to go for the whole enchilada. We're going to build 80% of a course from scratch. So what I did towards the end of this project is I just typed in Unix and C programming, and 5 minutes later, I got a pretty amazing course on Unix and C programming, everything. Images, videos, the courses, the introductions, the competencies, the gamification, the question banks, the assignments, all the stuff that's like a pretty heavy lift. And I say 80% because everyone is gonna want to go in and personalize it and review it and make it their own. And we're going to release this thing on Monday, and it will do everything I mentioned for $1. Like generate 80% of a course for $1. And the reason I think this is important is because this can then speed up high quality course development. And it can also allow an L&D person to generate 5 versions of the same course in 10 minutes, pick the one that they like, and then iterate on that. So it opens up the opportunity for agile course development. Like in engineers, we do agile development. Now we're like agile course development. So that's what, as you can tell, I'm really enthusiastic about this stuff. Everyone we show it to, their jaw just drops. It's like, oh my God. So this is an area which is a big innovation, I think, in the area of L&D. There's going to be a lot more, but I think this is one that will really, people will take note and listen. So that's my 2 cents on the L&D innovation with AI.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. And I've definitely had those similar moments where I've seen what generative AI or ChatGPT different apps can do, and my jaw has dropped and said, wow, awesome. This is really helpful. So we've now heard a little bit of what this looks like, right, in a talent development space. So now I'd love to hear from Yelena and Jason. So how are you seeing incorporation of technology and innovation? How are you seeing that come to life and feel to the end user? Because we do have a lot of product owners, product developers on this call, managers of product developers, designers. So putting that hat on, what does that look like to the end user? Oh, Yelena.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kellen. And I'll probably jump on a wagon of how to create less miserable experiences and overlay it with what's happening over the last couple months in particular. Because the innovation that we're talking about it really creates infinite amount of possibilities where there's newer technologies that are available to us are truly used more as a commodity and applied in different contexts. So you can think of the number of the startup companies that will be showing up in the next few months, perhaps. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but I'm pretty sure that every day we are hearing about the new startup that's experimenting using large language model in certain use cases. So this is actually wonderful because the innovation is really about trying and experimenting, failing, and really ultimately coming up with what works best. And that takes me to this kind of product mindset more, where I would say I'm a big believer of a philosophy that high-tech organizations often apply when they bring new product into their ecosystem, and it's actually agnostic of the domain, be it people function or HR practices or else. It's using the model of putting the customer or the user, if I would use more generic term, at the very center of the entire design. And in fact, wearing my former Amazonian hat, where I worked for a couple of years, it was amazing practice to literally put a chair in the room at the center of the conference room, with an imagination of a customer being or sitting in that chair. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that we should go to that level, but just having that mindset of who is your customer, what the needs are in the design of those applications, I think is really important. And then the second component is readiness to experiment. I cannot overemphasize how often we hear the feedback that, well, it needs to be perfect before we really try it. Should we wait a little bit until this field is better defined? I would say having 80-20 model is really what to go with. And in a classic experimental mindset, so data and data and data. So collecting the data down the line, understanding the actual, whether the technology or the product that's being implemented is actually meeting or exceeding the bar is really the way to go. So customer and data, I think that's the combo that you can never go wrong with in the product deployments.
Yeah, Elaine, I'm hearing a lot of human-centered design aspects in there, which is so powerful, along with the piloting aspect. Yeah, absolutely love that. Jason, what are you seeing? What are you seeing in terms of incorporation of technology in the innovation space?
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of piggyback on a lot of what's already been said, because for me, the rise of AI and all of the tech developments that is a part of, because it's just one element of it, really is about scaling up personalized learning. That is very much at the core of it, which has been, before this point, very sort of impractical. And speaking from a professor's perspective, you can't learn the individual, so you can't have completely personalized learning journeys really without AI. You could do it with 10 students, you can do it with 20 students, you can do it with 100 students, but you probably can't do it on the level of the institution. So one of the really powerful things about AI is it allows.
Oh, Jason, I think you froze.
Fully online learning journeys. And
Jason,
that's a really, oh yeah.
Quick, could you repeat that? You froze a little bit. Could you go back, rewind 10 seconds?
Gotcha. Yeah, so that it allows companies and colleges to give students fully personalized learning journeys. And you can see this on small and big levels. So I'm driving back from a conference today, and I gave a presentation on ChatGPT. And I started off by saying that I wanted to give a PowerPoint presentation, but I didn't have it yet. I hadn't created it yet. So I brought up my Gamma account. I asked for feedback on that topic. And then in 20 seconds, and if you've ever played with this program, it's sort of wild. In 20 seconds, it created our PowerPoint from beginning to end. And that's, I think, very much representative of what we can do for our learners, what we can do for our students if we're on that side of the aisle. And just being able to embrace that can be an incredibly powerful thing, especially thinking about just access. There are a lot of things about L&D and formal education that have been traditionally inaccessible to certain individuals. And now, done right, I think AI and technology in general can really, really help alleviate that and work more students in and give them actual ways to just grow personally, professionally. And so I think that we need to embrace that and figure out the best ways to use.
Oh, Jason, I think you froze again.
It might help if he turned off his video. He might have some more bandwidth that way.
Okay. Hey, Jason, if you can hear me, if you want to turn off your video, it might help. Yeah, I hear you.
I just tried that. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes.
Cool. Okay, quick question for you. We did have a topical question quickly about what a Gamma account is. Could you explain that or define that?
Oh, what a Gamma account is?
Yes.
Oh, so Gamma is, so it's GAMMA. It is a software program that uses artificial intelligence to create websites, documents, and PowerPoints. So you would basically start it off with a basic prompt, and it will go and create a fully edited, editable PowerPoint. that you can go in, you can add your own stuff, you can do your own images, but it will do it from end to end. So it gives you in about a minute or so, a fully realized rough draft.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I think that helped your bandwidth. Yeah, so hearing a lot of different tools that you were all using. We also did have a request in the chat for anything you've mentioned today in terms of different products. If you're able to pop those in the chat from the panelists' perspective, that would be great. Yeah, so hearing a lot of different ways that we're seeing this actually come to fruition in different environments. So I'd like to kind of talk now, and we did already see a question about this come up in the chat. So it's very, very prevalent, and I think we're feeling this within our workspaces. So we hear a lot of perils around technology too, right? So we hear that, wow, this ChatGPT sounds like it's already doing my job, okay. Things like losing human connection. What are some common misconceptions about innovation in this space that you all would like to bust? And I'm actually going to throw everyone for a loop here on the panel and ask everyone this question. So would love to hear from Nabil again. What are you thinking? What are some things you want to bust?
Yeah, sure. And this actually is part of the reason why I started my 4-minute university. And the reason why I mention that is because there's a lot of things, like if you really think about what generative AI and a lot of these AI tools are good at, they're very good at collecting massive amounts of data, synthesizing it, and giving you something that probably has already existed before. So that's the one thing I would say is as you start to use these, while they can save you a lot of time, if you're looking for something perhaps very unique, and I think we all know this at this point, is you don't want to necessarily take what you get off the first pass and just use it. But also sometimes I think it's helpful to think about, well, what is not being said in these in the results, and can that potentially be a unique perspective that you can provide? Because again, most of generative AI and these apps are based off of data that's pre-trained. So that could be a good essentially litmus test that you could use there. The other thing I would say is that, you know, really around the myths and busting it is, no matter how good the technology is, it's very important to understand how people learn, the psychology around how people make decisions or not, and understanding how to leverage technology to do that. And that's really a lot of what I started with my own work, is to say, okay, if we really understand the educational learning theories around, all right, if we have this PowerPoint slide, let's say, and it's great, and there's 15 bullets per slide, and you start to present it, guess what? Everybody's going to start reading no matter what you'll be showing on there. So I think that's a good one, is to really understand that the technology, while it's becoming greater and greater, our minds, our human brains aren't necessarily keeping up with that. And there's very different levels of complexity that we need to understand and look at people as a whole, because at the end of the day, people are using this technology, and understanding the non-technical components of it, I think oftentimes is going to be increasingly more important as the technology just keeps getting better and better. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Graham, first I'm going to actually ask you a startup question here. Graham, what is the biggest concern that you hear in the industry that you have to, in terms of innovation and about AI? What's the biggest concern that you consistently hear?
And it's a concern that's very, very easy to address. But one of the biggest concerns is, how do I deal with the fact that it's not perfect? Because people use, and we use more than just ChatGPT under the hood, it's actually using other stuff as well. And what we just say is that, like in our case, our feature is called Copilot. It's not called Autopilot. So, and it's all about accelerating everyday tasks using AI. But part of using AI in a careful way is that you understand the fact that you are going to get involved in the loop. So while Copilot can do 80% of it, you are actually going to be doing 20% of the stuff that really matters. And so when people realize the fact that we're not taking the human out of the loop, and everything that it creates can be then modified by you and added to and deleted by you, then it's like, okay, now I understand it. But it's when it's positioned as, oh, it's just going to do everything, then yeah, I would have the same concern. Like, Copilot CEO is going to do everything for you. Like, uh-oh, what do I do? So that's, one thing I would say. So certainly, I think for right now, people in the know are calling these things co-pilots. They're not calling them autopilots. One of the things that was very interesting, by the way, so one of my hobbies is coming up with movie ideas. And I want to give Nabil a little bit of feedback here. So I created a pretty cool movie script all about AI. And it was called like AI Justice Day or something like that. It was quite a cool sci-fi movie. So I created it and I said, ChatGPT, imagine that you are a movie critic. What do you think about this movie? And it gave me like a 4.5 star. It wasn't 5 star. And it's like, well, because the ending was a little bit weak. Okay. But then I said, well, how would you improve upon it? And it came up with a really cool, better ending. That is not, there's no existing movie about this kind of thing. So I do want to say that it's such, but then I came up with an even better one, by the way. So I kind of one-upped ChatGPT. But I do want to score, it is actually quite creative. It's not just like a copy and paste or like spewing stuff out. It actually can come up with quite cool ideas of its own. And of course, the big question is how do we leverage that? But that's another story. I will also say one thing, and that is we're a platform provider. We want to create the best modern learning experience. And the AI stuff is just one part of it. I mean, our platform has got hundreds of features. And you can have the best AI in the world, but if it's packaged in something which looks like it's from the 1980s, it's not going anywhere. So, so the AI part in terms of delivering value to the end user, it's not just about an AI, it's about the entire platform that really matters.
And you know what, Graham, speaking of creativity, the actual title for the webinar today was something that was created by ChatGPT because I was having a creative block. So that in itself is a great way to use ChatGPT. Thanks, Graham, for that. Yeah, Yelena, what do you think? What are you thinking about, like, myths you'd like to bust around innovation?
Yeah, well, frankly, I would probably say the same thing using different words, but essentially, maybe just framing or reframing our narrative from, you know, AI led to AI enabled, because I think that really helps to help people understand that this is not a space where we're saying either or, like it's either humans or machines. It's really the complementing kind of power of this minds, if you will, these artificial and human intelligence. So, and on that note, I think one, my personal unfavorites in that way is the mainstream of ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is awesome, but it is so generic in some ways, where the true application in an HR context, in talent practice context, is typically using what is underlying power of ChatGPTs, which is that large language model, call it GPT, and applying that in the context of your organization. So this is where the result of the same activity will change significantly. And I just have enormous amount of conversations when we are introducing new product, and the very first thing we would say that's generative AI enabled is going to be like, oh, I use ChatGPT and it did not give me the right answer. I hate it. So, and it almost implies automatically that this is why whatever new technology that you're bringing into the ecosystem wouldn't work. So I feel like the opportunity is to reframe positioning to AI enabled versus AI driven. Secondly, it's a bit of education journey for us too, for all of us. I don't remember who said that, cannot remember the exact name, but it's not that AI will replace you, it's the people who know how to use AI will. So I think that that is really also important as we continue exploring and experimenting with all these wonderful tools, which again, as I mentioned in an earlier kind of section, that I think that this is all commodity, the commodity applied in certain context. And that's where we are heading to. And to me, this is understanding a little bit more rather than continuing having this ongoing battles and almost polarity in views that it's great or it's awful. So it's really making the best of two worlds. That's, to me, is the path to demystify this a little bit and make the most of it.
Absolutely. And Yelena, something I find very interesting is, especially in like product and tech and engineering teams and orgs, they're very used to writing prompts, right? To coding and writing prompts. And now it seems like ChatGPT innovation is it's kind of teaching us that we have to do that. So learning how to write prompts to where, yeah, it will actually give us what we need so we can build off of it. Jason, how you doing?
I'm good. And you can hear me okay?
Yes, all good. What would you like to demystify or debunk?
Yeah, so I have two of them. One of them.
Oh, Jason, I think you spoke too soon. Yeah, you just cut out
right
a bit.
now.
Okay. You're back.
I just drove by a giant truck. That's probably why.
Okay, you're back.
The myth that using AI is easy. I think that is everywhere. And I'm going to be totally honest with you. I yell internally, of course, at my AI every day. I get frustrated to the extent that the first thing I do, but when I go into ChatGPT or whatever AI I'm using, I give myself a few seconds to just calm down and get in a meditative state. One of the reasons I do that is that to really get the most out of AI, you have to be in an incredibly collaborative mindset. If you're not, if you just, at least for me, see the AI as just simply a tool there to do your bidding, it backfires, right? Because then I get more and more frustrated if it's not doing exactly what I want it to do. And then the other myth that I would love to debunk is the idea that there's only one way to use it. If you go online and you look at social media sites or anything else, you will find these quote unquote master prompts that people have created that you can copy and paste and use them in certain ways. And that's fundamentally not how the AI works. That in order to really use it well in a way that enhances our own productivity and our own creativity, I think we have to be willing to, in many ways, embrace our own style. There are a lot of different ways to engage with AI. There are different frameworks. Some of them work really well for me. Some of them do not. There's all this advice about whether you're supposed to use pleasantries when interacting with ChatGPT. Should you say please? Should you say thank you? Which is treating it like it's a human. And in the end, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that we have to make our own individual decisions based off of what we're comfortable with and what works for us. And we need to be willing to iterate and figure out if we need a framework, what kind of framework it should be, and what kind of, not just prompting, but follow-up with something like ChatGPT actually works for us, and it might not work for everyone else.
I still use please and thank you, Jason. Oh, to my yeah, Graham, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to add, for example, is that the way that Cypher Learning is going about utilizing AI is that we're not talking about ChatGPT at all. There is no ChatGPT user interface, for example. There's just Copilot. And what we do is we make it so you just tell it, create this course for me. There's a couple of checkboxes and go. Under the hood, it's using ChatGPT. And as you mentioned, that's why I was chuckling. Getting those prompts just right is not an easy thing. And when we build a course, for example, we talk to ChatGPT API about 150 times. It's not like, hey, give me a course. 150 tiny, fast conversations during those 5 minutes. And at the end, you just get the end result. So part of our feeling is that if we're doing a good job as a learning platform vendor, we want to hide all that complexity from you so that you just use this very, very friendly interface and it does all the nasty stuff behind the scenes. I do appreciate that. I mean, I use ChatGPT in the raw, so to speak, at nighttime. But as a platform vendor, our inclination is not to give that kind of UI to our end customers.
Yeah, that's super helpful to see how this looks in different scenarios and different products. So thank you for that, Graham. Jason, just wanted to kind of go back to you on the question of areas that you haven't seen be touched by innovation in generative AI, general AI, ChatGPT, any of the products we've talked about. What are some areas you're interested in seeing it show up?
I'm really interested, and this is going to be very much a reflection of my own interest in what I do, in platforms that are going to really optimize AI for students in a way that really serves the students, but also does it in an ethical way. Here in my mind is a million or multi-million-dollar business idea. So someone can steal it, you can build it if you want. And this is what I think it's going to be. Step number one is, and this is already going to be very, very difficult to do, a version of ChatGPT that is a closed circuit, right? Because if you're going into schools and you want students to really think about how to use ChatGPT appropriately and ethically, it's one thing if the user is 18 years old. It's another if the user is 9 years.
I think you just drove by another truck.
Do they? Oh, yes, I did.
Okay, there you go.
Step number one is going to be doing what you need to do to close that circle, right? So that it is a closed system, it's not being shared, it's not being worked into the training data, and going beyond what ChatGPT has right now. There are a lot of businesses and models that are starting to do that, although I don't know if they've quite gotten there, at least not to the extent that we'd be comfortable giving it to children. And then the second step is going to be leveling something like ChatGPT. So imagine if you're a school and someone came to you and said, I took ChatGPT, I made a closed circuit, so everything is under the school's control. They have a lot of influence over what data is being used, why it's being used, and what's being done with the data that goes in, right? They say that to you. And then they say, also, you can personalize it per level, right? So you can say, here's a version of ChatGPT that you can control, it's a closed circuit, and you can level it for an 8th grader, right? And so I think that in many ways for me is a multi-million-dollar business if you can do that when it comes to formal education. And there are a couple of steps that I think need to happen there, but that's something where I think we're starting to see innovation in that area, but I think it's only starting now, at least based off of what I'm seeing.
Absolutely, Jason. And what it's bringing to mind for me is the TED Talk that Khan Academy has recently had around they were demoing a product of teaching people how to code. And there's also like a virtual agent that helps correct your code. And from a student perspective, really, really helpful. So not exactly what you're talking about, but kind of within the same.
Yeah, very much connected though, yeah.
Yeah, Yelena, what areas are you interested in seeing, especially from like a corporate perspective?
Yeah, I was just going to say that maybe my example will be very corporate centric, and not sure if it's not being experimented at the moment. What I mean by that, there's so much innovation that's going on. It's literally impossible maybe even to know about all ongoing pilots, but I can speak actually more practically about one of the experiments that I'm currently doing at the firm. And the application of, I know we talk about generative AI, so I will continue holding us on this thread, but using generative AI in the context of the talent lifecycle. So what I mean by that is from a point of helping to generate skill assessment questions. So we really have a mechanism to ensure that an individual, an employee, a colleague has a pass for skill assessment, but just not to confuse it with the kind of generic assessments that we would otherwise need to buy, but creating those assessments by virtue of feeding our model any content you can think of, from PDF to PowerPoint to Word doc to URL. So imagine the world that you are using any of that references, and in a matter of few seconds, skills assessment questions are generated, which are mapped to different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So there's definitely a lot of thinking that went into just the whole model behind question generation. And then if that's something that we will do right, and this way we enable the path for an individual to understand where the skill sets are, and then where the gaps are, and you can probably continue the story. If we know where the gaps are, there is immediate connection to the learning opportunity. And frankly, using less of what we're typically in learning and development industry would have like packaged content and needing to go and finding it somewhere, rather using what we call embeddings of the large language models and pulling the content out of your ecosystem in a summarized, synthesized way and making it available at the fingertips of the employees. So it's really showing across the entire life cycle of an individual. And actually, I would dare to say that this is the first time we've gone this far, maybe across or within the talent management practice, where we're creating interconnected journey for cross kind of functional practices. Because in typical case, we have standalone learning and development, standalone recruiting, standalone perhaps employee experience team, etc. Whereas now looking at it through that integrated lens and leveraging the power of AI, I think that's really something that is exciting and promising. Though totally agree with Jason, requires quite a bit of time to be patient and fine tune what we need to ultimately create and make or meet the bar at which we're expecting to see this.
Yeah, I think I saw Graham. Yeah, Graham, go ahead. I think I saw your hand first, and then Nabil. You sparked a lot.
I was trying to do the polite thing, which is raise my hand in Zoom, and I just cannot find the raise hand option anywhere. So I'll just raise my physical hand. I guess that's old school. I want to share one quick anecdote and then how I think this is going to affect L&D. And it's also very much aligned with what the previous speaker was talking about with regards to skills development. So I'm a voracious reader, and recently we had the tragic incident with the submersible, and it was all connected with Titanic. And the way that I usually used to learn is I'd go to Google, I would search Titanic, I would get a few links and videos, I might search on Twitter, and I'm searching all these spaces and putting to learning them as I go. But now we have this co-pilot. I thought, well, I'm going to use it just for me, even though it's intended for corporate audience. So I just said, build me a personalized course on Titanic. And then 5 minutes later, it's pulled all the YouTube, the images, the text, all this kind of stuff into a self-contained experience for me. Also automatically connected to competencies or skills, if you like. So every little thing about the Titanic is actually tracking as I'm learning it. So why did I mention this anecdote? So the main focus of Cypher Learning is on personalized skills development. And for personalized skills development, you have to have a digital learning profile. And then based on a gap analysis of what you want to get good at and what you're currently good at, that allows you to then serve up the appropriate content. And traditionally, the overworked L&D staff are the ones that have to, create all these courses quickly. So just imagine a situation where a new thing comes along. Maybe there's in a new job, there's like icon design is an important new skill. So the way it used to be is like, hey, there's a new competency that you need to get good at, but we don't have the course in it yet. So what can we recommend to you? Or maybe a YouTube video or something. With generative AI, you can have a co-pilot on the learner side that will actually generate a personalized course just for you on demand, linked to all the competencies. It would have to be heavily caveated, like this is made by AI. It might not be 100% accurate. So you can imagine a situation where you're not just quizzing people using AI to generate quizzes, you're actually generating something just for you in your job title with your current skill set. And that goes to personalized learning at scale. So this stuff can be awesome. We're actually releasing that later this year, by the way. So I'm not talking about some far-flung future concept, but this is an example where AI can do stuff that humans could not do before.
Yeah, so interesting to have a whole course on the Titanic and on current events. Absolutely. Nabil, what are you thinking?
Sure, and Graham, don't feel bad. It took me a couple minutes to find the raise hand piece as well. I realize I teach a lot of classes through here, but I've never actually raised my hand. So we're one of the same for what it's worth. So, but one of the things that I want to mention, thanks, Colin, for the opportunity, is looking at where I feel there's lots of opportunity in the L&D space for HR and talent that's yet to be explored is when we're talking a lot about AI, a lot of it is what I would call more in the downstream space, which is good. Like again, Titanic, give me a course around that. Help me understand how to do something very specific, kind of task oriented. And it's really good at that because there's lots of information that's available and it can compile it, put it in a chronological order, give you some objectives, etc. And I've yet to mention it, but I'll mention it now, that my actual day job, the work that I do, is really working more on using AI for what we call like the upstream strategic work. So think of you're a CLO, a chief learning officer, a CHRO, and they all have their strategy, their business strategy, their marching orders of here's how I want to run my organization. And they all know it like the back of their hand. They probably have a very nice color printed laminated sheet that they show everyone. Here's my strategy. But if you ask them, well, which part of your strategy should you be focusing on next? And one of two things happens. They either don't know, or they're saying this and they're just guessing. They're like, it's just based off of a hunch. So the question then becomes is, well, can you use AI-based type of technologies to help get ahead of some potential problem areas? So think of it as more like leading indicators instead of lagging indicators before those things actually happen. And that's actually the main work that I do in my work, and really building kind of models around that. We use OpenAI. We've been using it, 3 or 4 years or 2-3 years now, kind of to run a lot of the models. But the main thing that I wanted to just kind of bring out is that oftentimes the way that AI is used is to collect data, classify data, to say, okay, let's use these, again, these large language general models to say, let's get everything out there that we can, make sense of it, and produce something that makes sense and is useful for people. Where the opportunities are, where I feel in a lot of the work that I've seen come up more on the strategic side, is to say, well, what are you trying to do? What's your strategy? Can we feed your strategy into an AI, train it around just what good and bad or better or worse outcomes look like, and then integrate that to different tools that you use, like a Zoom, like in the chat, for instance, or a MS Teams, or a Trello, or a bunch of different types of software there, and then give leaders just a snapshot of here's where you may want to focus on next. And so that's a lot of the work that I've been up to. And then I think I've seen less of it, especially in the L&D space, but I feel like it's a big opportunity going forward. So I just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think it kind of leads right into the next question, which is something that I'm also super curious about. So in terms of organizations that maybe have gotten their L&D budgets cut or their innovation budgets cut, there's just no resourcing into looking into buying different tools or integrating different projects, no engineers to build out or hard code anything into the tools that are already existing. What are things that people on this call can take away and go into their team tomorrow, or go into their stakeholders tomorrow and say, hey, I'd like to start trying this, or hey, we can actually implement this? So we'd love to start with Yelena.
Well, I will be as boring as saying, let's start with use cases. Like, the use case needs to be so well defined, because one struggle that I believe companies sometimes have is there's this great idea, amazing idea, and everybody loves it. But when it comes to real questions, so what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how are you going to test it? What's your use case? I would say that literally starting from that, and it can be as small as, I don't know, like literally even, do you want to experiment with designing a learning course, right? And really do some comparison or experimental analysis. What does it take in terms of the resources and time that it takes to do one versus, using one technology versus the other? And frankly, only because I work with a number of vendors, actually, you would be surprised how often some of those small experimental use cases can be literally, POC'd or piloted with such a small budget need, if not for free at times. I'm not setting any kind of expectations here, but just it's a thing that all boils down to being selective in your use case and making sure that you have data that you could really use before and after. And to me, that's a starting point, because tackling big, huge systems that the organization may have, I mean, we all are probably remembering stories of going back and forth and sometimes really wondering, is the sunk cost fallacy that we are seeing here, or what's the matter? But starting point, nimble, use case, and the data.
Love that. Yeah. What do you think, Nabil? Oh, yeah, good, Nabil, and then Graham.
Yeah, I would agreed 100% on what Elena is saying, is that oftentimes, as someone with a technology background, I double down on the opinion that getting technology alone is not going to fix any challenge or problem that you have. There's oftentimes, in my opinion, a misconception that if I just had this tool, I would be able to do this. And then once they get that tool, they realize that, you know what, there's actually a bigger ecosystem at play that we need to consider. And oftentimes, you know, it's like this simple framework of people, process, platform, or people, process, technology. If you don't have all three and working together in tandem, and you're just focusing, let's say, on the technology, then there's a drop off there. So back to your question, Colin, around, well, let's say there's budget constraints or things like that. You know, as was mentioned just earlier, now is probably the best time to be able to get low cost or no cost types of tools just to experiment and just understand, could this potentially work for us? If we feel the technology can work, then how do we need to adjust our processes? A good example, for instance, maybe to be a little bit more concrete, is oftentimes, I know one of the big FAANG companies, so FAANG, the what is it, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. There was a student in one of my classes who worked at one of those on the talent side, and they started using Textio. You may have heard of that, Textio, and it was really to help them with their job applications and really kind of figure out where potential bias may occur. Now, again, anyone can really use this. The cost is relatively low, but what they found out is that the software was working so well that that company across the entire organization updated their process to say, we need to have a minimum score or a minimum passing score before any new job is posted internally or externally. So my point is that even if you're dealing, let's say, with some budget constraints or whatnot around the technology itself, one, you could dip your toes in it and see if the use cases work, as was Yelena mentioned, right? And then the second one is saying, well, what are the other things in relation to the tech? Do we need to retrain or upskill or reskill our people? And how do we need to adjust our processes? So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So good. Yeah, love that. What do you think, Graham? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I will mention, and that is, especially when you've got budget constraints, it's always nice to have a handy return on investment calculator by your side. And so, for example, if you are going to use something like our Copilot feature, we actually build the ROI calculator directly into the feature to try and help people who try out this technology to justify it. Because if you can show your CFO you're actually going to save money, you're going to become more efficient, or to your line of business manager, that will just make your case that much stronger. So for example, a typical course, according to industry stats, costs, let's just say, $14,000 to create and 400 hours of work. But in our case, if you can do 80% of that for $1, then the cost savings are about $11,000 per course, and you've saved 320 hours. And so that's like a very obvious ROI. So part of what we want to do, we want to help people who are using our platform, content creators, instructors, make their days easier. So we try and give them this kind of ROI calculator to better make their case, especially given the current headwinds out there.
Love a good handy calculator. That's great. Yeah, Jason, anything from you on this?
Yes, I do have a lot. I do have a lot to say in terms of this. And you know, some people might be able to adapt it. I think that it does definitely relate to the L&D space. And I'm coming from an interesting perspective because I have no money, right? There is at the college level, there's no L&D money. We're all experimenting with the technology and creating things out of it, but everything is out of our pocket. So I think AI is running into a little bit of a problem. And I think the problem is that AI is cool. And when something is cool and it's trendy, it gets worked into everything. I do not know how many educational products I have looked at, saw the AI use, and shook my head and said, no, this should not have happened. there is another way to do it. We need to be very purpose driven, because I'm seeing a lot of products that are now having AI thrown into there, but it's not actually helping the students, or sorry, the learners or students out. So the process that I use, and I use it somewhat unabashedly, is ATD. I developed ATD for AI. So analyzing users' needs, students' needs, whatever you're working with, having them in conversation, trying to figure out if AI actually helps the student or learner with whatever that they need. So having them a part of the conversation. Then if I do decide it's going to help or think it's going to help, I do a very quick prototype of it. I literally grab my iPad and I try to figure out what it's going to look like. I sketch it out and I do it fast. Then I go through the process of designing and developing a little bit, and then I implement it. And my implementation is me. I use myself as my own guinea pig. I run it, in that program, whatever it is, I see what it's like, and I try to figure out if it's actually helping me. Now, I know that's not perfect because I'm using me instead of a user. Theoretically, you can totally use the user if you have access to them. And then I evaluate from there. And sometimes I think that the use of AI actually helps the learner get to where they need to get to or focus on what they need to focus on. And more often than not, it doesn't. And so I cut it out. And so using ATD that way allows me to figure out when to cut my losses and when I shouldn't pay for a program. Trial period, but I can only do it if I do it relatively quickly. So for me, I've just adapted ATD for my own purposes, and that has helped me out quite a bit to decide when AI is actually serving a good purpose or if I'm just doing it because it's cool.
Oh, that's so great, especially using, and of course, ATD and human-centered design have a lot of connections, but it also resonates a lot with what Yelena was saying earlier. So yeah, I think a lot of us don't have a lot of budget. So Jason, that resonated. Great. Okay, so kind of closing out here on the panel piece, then we'll open up for questions. Would love to hear just a 2-minute advice piece from each of you on the panel here of what you would say to people on the call around really embracing the right type of innovation within their roles, and maybe even how they would be able to have these conversations with their teams or with their stakeholders of how to embrace. So Graham, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I've been interested in AI since I was a kid, but it's only in the last few months that it's suddenly taken off for obvious reasons. And I know when I first heard about ChatGPT, and my Twitter's like 90% ChatGPT these days, unfortunately. The first thing I did was I just tried it. And it was a very interesting learning experience because I started off by saying, what's 2 + 2? 4. Okay, so it knows like really basic stuff. Who are you? And you start asking like really simple questions, but then you start having these really sophisticated, like, teach me about nuclear physics using the Socratic method. And it does a fantastic job. And suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, this thing is way more powerful than I ever first thought. So I thought originally it was like in this little box, and then I thought the box got bigger, and now it's like almost this entire world. So then you begin to realize, well, this could help with so many things. And then it's really a question about, well, what do I want to do with it? So I'm using it for my hobby, of course, my movie thing. I use it for my business. We're using it in our learning platform, but there are so many things you could do. Then it's really a question about what are the areas that are going to be highest leverage? And of course, that will vary. But I would say if you're going to chat with a team or your boss or someone, if you can get everyone to actually have an experience like I had with ChatGPT, that kind of sets the scene where you don't have someone who doesn't really understand what's going on, has never seen the power of it, because they might be thinking about things through a very small lens, not through this much bigger lens.
Yeah, so don't tell them about them, tell them about it, have them experience it. Absolutely. Yeah. What do you think, Yelena?
Well, there's a lot to be said here, because I feel like the starting point perhaps is, it just in retrospect, you may all remember a couple of years ago, we're talking about digital literacy. then we're talking about tech literacy. I think we are in the era when we really need to be talking about AI literacy and starting from self, just to understand the context, understand. I'm not by all means suggesting to go into the depth of AI and machine learning, but really feeling comfortable about some main concepts. And there are tons of materials and content out there. My personal favorite, who I'm following and recommending often, is Dr. Andrew Ng. And there are courses and programs that vary from what the prompt engineering is and what's the basic AI. So I feel like this is really the starting point, just to feel comfortable in the overall domain, and then really overlaying it with your role. And because I assume I'm speaking to primarily talent development practitioners, professionals here, I got to say, and maybe this is not going to be a popular comment, we in HR typically historically known to be risk averse, more like questioning and challenging before truly bringing those new tools and innovation. So I do think this is a time for us as practitioners to really even reframe in terms of what are the expected competencies or capabilities that learning designers should have, talent development professionals should have, learning managers. I mean, I'm referring to one of ATD's capability frameworks actually in this context. So I think we do have some job to do, but starting it from self and self-education journey and starting to codify that a little bit more within the industry.
Absolutely. It kind of makes me think of like using AI as like your little pet and starting to like give it some love, start playing with it, start seeing how you can interact with it. Yeah, and then see how you can connect it. Absolutely. Thanks, Yelena. Nabil.
Thank you. A couple of things just real quick. One is to start out when we were doing the intros or the first question, I talked about is this a moment that matters? And I think more and more as we start to see AI can creep into every part of our lives and can have a positive effect. But applying it into the workplace is we ask ourselves, okay, piggybacking on what a couple of others said is one, experience it firsthand, definitely. I remember when I was teaching a class about 10 years ago, Wikipedia was popular. And maybe ask yourself, have you ever edited a Wikipedia article? Probably not. I never did until I had this assignment. And the process to do it, I learned a lot just by something that I used every day as a consumer. Then I turned around and became a producer of it. So the reason why I mentioned that is, as was already mentioned before, is experience it firsthand, because you'll start to get some interesting knowledge and just some firsthand type of relevance that I think will help you. And to me, the test really is, if we look at data, for instance, this was probably one of the last big things before AI. To me, the general test is, if you hear AI, do you run away or are you comfortable being in the conversation? And as long as you're not running away, then I think you're good enough, right? Is that we all don't have to be AI experts. Just like with data, if you hear people talk about data or whatnot, if you can be in the same room and be comfortable talking with them without necessarily knowing all the details, I think that's an important thing. And really, again, just going back to, well, what are those moments that matter? And when you look at it in the context of how you apply it at work, then where we're starting to see AI is that a lot of these things that it can do now will essentially be a commodity, that every tool will pretty much be able to do things very similarly. And what will separate some types of offerings from others is the experience that you have around it. So the organizations, the people, the companies who really focus on, okay, do we want to make this a good experience and make it so simple that it becomes natural? That to me is going to be a big differentiator going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and Nabil, as a certified coach, something that you just said, it kind of gave me a light bulb around self-coaching. If you hear AI and you feel uncomfortable, ask yourself why you're not curious about that and what you need to learn in order to be curious versus uncomfortable. Yeah, I love that. I think I saw a lot in the chat too, people saying that's a great perspective.
Thanks.
Jason.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll do is just echo the idea that it needs to be experienced, that and not just once or twice, but that in order to get beyond our initial assumptions and also our fears, because I think they are very much at play, irrespective of the sector that we're working in, to get beyond assumptions and fears, we need to find a way to use AI every day to really start to understand it. And I'm coming from a sector where our initial try was to ban it. Ban AI, ban ChatGPT from the classroom, whether you're talking in K-12 and also colleges, right? Thinking about just banning the technology altogether. And the first step, and I think we've now done this, to getting beyond that is having people actually use it. And that allows you to get past all of the knee-jerk reactions, which are based off of so many different things. A lot of times it's based off of movies, it's based off of the fact that they saw Terminator a while ago and stuff like that. And so that really pushes their assumptions. And the second thing I'll say is making sure that we're using AI responsibly. And that conversation has been so huge. So responsible AI, ethical AI. I've never seen in my entire life so many people are so interested in ethics and philosophy. And I think that offshoot of it has been actually awesome. That now
Another truck.
and there are so many different levels of that, right? There's obviously just the theoretical aspect of it, that certainly play. And then there's some more ChatGPT and Midjourney and Dolly, and you can go down the line, right? And they're going to keep coming. They're going to keep coming one after another, after another, after another. Now, I'm not saying that that necessarily means that all these uses of AI are unethical, but it does bring up questions about if you're using something like ChatGPT, which is trained off of data that was created by humans who did not consent to that data being used in certain ways, we need to be very, very careful about what we are doing and what we are using. And that's going to be especially be the case if the US, I don't know if this will happen, but if the US follows what was just done in the EU. So if you follow what's happening with the EU agreement, OpenAI convinced the EU to not really focus on limiting OpenAI. That's what we thought they were going to do, but that's not it. What they're going to do is they're going to police companies that build products off of AI. They're going to go after the small companies, not the big one. And so the stakes here are really, really huge, especially if and when the US decides to start restricting certain kinds of fix. It needs to be not just something that happens at the end, but something that is central.
Oh, I think we're losing you, Jason. You've cut out a few times. Are you back, Jason?
I'm back, but that was it. Did you?
Nope, I think you're cutting out a little bit. So if you want to, maybe get through some traffic, we'll go ahead and go on to the panels. But yes, to the point of how you can use it in different environments. I love the case study around the EU. I think a lot of what we're seeing in the chat kind of coming in now is around questions of if your company is completely banned AI and those just any type of innovation around technology. So I see that question coming up. We do have 5 minutes, and I think our panelists have been really great at going into the chat and answering a few of those questions. So we'd just love an answer from one of you. From the question that's in the chat around if your company has completely said, no, blocking it all, we're not doing this. What do you think? Other than experiencing it, we've talked a lot about that, but let's say, that's a few levels above you, you don't have that access. What can you do? Go ahead, Graham.
I mean, I would say it's ridiculous to block it. It doesn't make any, it's like blocking the internet. So I understand that there are some situations like you're not going to copy and paste your proprietary super patented algorithm into ChatGPT. I can understand that. And I can understand having policies that say anything that you use the AI to do, you need to review. But anyone can go into Google and find. Do companies block Google? I doubt it. And I can go into Google and I can do a search and I can copy and paste from any site. So I think companies that are just simply uniformly blocking it are making a big mistake.
Elena.
Yeah, I can actually build on that and really maybe pose a question. Are they blocking AI, or are they blocking generative AI, or are they blocking actually ChatGPT? Because there are some open source tools like ChatGPT, and there's a lot of reaction and maybe those controversial kind of positions that the companies are taking, that they want to block that. Or is this really the question where, back to our earlier discussion, coming up with a use case, talking about generative AI does not equal ChatGPT. I just want to be very, very clear on that. And this is where I think the line should be drawn. When we say that our company blocks Gen AI, it's not necessarily the case. They may be blocking something which is absolutely non-controllable in some ways, which is ChatGPT. But there are, I would argue that the cases where there's partnership with, let's say, vendors, or there are internal capabilities, but I assume majority are in the category where there aren't internal capabilities for development of this, then it's really a conversation with the vendors about data protection. What is that communication with a large language model? And there has to be some proprietary tools that actually ensure that data privacy. That is the type of conversation to have, versus picking a fight of should we open ChatGPT, because probably there were some, C-suite decisions made on that. I just want to make sure that we understand that ChatGPT does not equal generative AI in all ways.
Great point. I also see in here, Matt has set up an ethical AI governance framework, and that's a really great way to have that conversation. So if any of you have already tackled this problem, please throw it in the chat. But I think this is where we're going to have to pause it, because we have 3 minutes left, and want to take a huge thank you to all of our panelists. This was an incredible conversation. The chat has been going wild. Lots of great energy, maybe some new curious opportunities within the companies, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here at ATD. So thank you so much for your time. Also, once again, special shout out to Cypher Learning for being our sponsor for ATD NYC. We thoroughly enjoyed having you here. And Paul, I believe you have some slides to show to close us out.
I do. I'm assuming you all can see. I don't know if that's too big.
Nope, looks great.
Okay. Basically, just wanted to thank all of our speakers, and thank you for attending today's session. I thought it was really great, very informative. Hopefully you felt the same way. We just set up a survey that should pop up when you exit the session. Let's hope it works right. I'm assuming it will. Future events and webinars are listed on your chapter's website. I will take a second to let you know that July's webinar is coming up the end of next month on, oops, and that should say July. Using the extended DISC model to build and manage great teams with Travis Cahill. He is from the West Virginia chapter, and that'll be next month. And then in August, we have another session scheduled. And this one is hosted by the Central Pennsylvania chapter. And this one is also on AI and ChatGPT. This is not a drill. ChatGPT, generative AI, and the disruption of training with John Hack. So we hope to see you at both of these events. I think they're going to be really interesting. So, and with that, I throw it back to you, Caitlin.
Yeah, great. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And for all the panelists, if there's any questions that are directed towards you, I'll make sure that you get them. But thank you all so much. And we'll make sure the recording is available on Wild Apricot as soon as possible.
And I will try my best to get that to you ASAP.
Thanks so much, Paul. All right. Have a great
problem.
night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Caitlin, if you want to stay on the line, Jenny and Caitlin, just for a minute, then once everybody departs, I guess.
Yep, yep.
I don't know if you wanted to speak to the speakers before they
Speakers are-
depart.
Speakers gone, except for Jason. I think everyone's here.
That's fine.
Great job.
Very
lot of,
interesting.
A lot of participation. And that was really a good turnout.
Anything else?